We're on Pei Beis Amud Aleph 82a. At the 2 dots, 3 lines in the bottom of the page. 4 lines actually. Actually not, we're a little further up.
Okay, so the shiyu around there, clean.
We're 4 lines down from the wide lines. 4 lines from the top of the wide lines.
Okay. First,
hold on 1 second. Shiyu Eichlin Shum Berev Shabbos. I'm sorry, 6 lines down. First 1 line is Mishum Kavod Shabbos.
Okay.
Okay. So we're talking about the 10 decrees that Ezra made. One of them was Shiyu Eichlin Shum Berev Shabbos, to eat garlic on Erev Shabbos. As the Gemara explains, Mishum Oina, because that is the time when a person should be with his wife. The Chsiv, as the verse states, Asher Purya Yitain Be'itay.
You equate garlic with being with your wife.
We'll explain. Okay. Asher Purya Yitain Be'itay means that the fruit will come in its time. What does that mean? V'Amar of Yehudah, v'Yitemar of Nachman, v'Yitemar of Kahana, some say it's of Kahana, v'Yitemar of Yechanan. What is it referring to? Zeh HaMashamash Mitasim, the Erev Shabbos, person who's intimate with his wife from every Friday night to Friday night. Let's explain. Tana Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, Chamisha Dvarim Nemru B'Shum. There are 5 things that are said about garlic. Masbia, it satisfies. Umashchin, it warms the body. Umatzel Ponim, it makes the face brighter. Umarba Hazera, it increases semen. The hurry, and that's the reason why garlic is in an Erev Shabbos. Person's gonna be with his wife, and it increases semen. It is conducive to having children. The hurry kinim, and it kills lice. Shebnei that are in the stomach. This sort of stomach bugs, quite literally. The yeshayimrim, some sort of parasites or something. The yeshayimrim machnes ava umaitzi esakino. It increases love and it removes jealousy. And that is why it is another reason why it would be on Friday. So when a woman's baking, she should bake in the morning. Why is that? It said if the poor people come to get bread, they should have bread. She should have bread to give them. A woman should wear a short pant, like basically undergarments, because of tznius. So that sort of she can't, it distances from sin.
Oh.
Okay. A woman has to comb before she goes to the mikvah. So Gemara says this is a biblical requirement. The Tanya we learned he washes his body with water. In other words, he goes to the mikvah. What does that mean? Nothing interferes between his flesh and the water. And okay, 1 second. And es basari, the word es adds something that's next to the flesh. What's next to the flesh? Here. Es basar, es atafel basari. My name is Sar. In other words, one who's going to the mikvah cannot have a separation between his hair. Okay, so clearly one cannot go to the mikvah without making sure that the hair is not. Let's say, for example, the hair is not knotted together. If it is knotted together, there would be a separation between the water touching the hair, and that separation would be the knots. So Gemara says, Amri. We learned the Raisel Yune, the Mikdar. Biblically, it's sufficient to just examine the hair and check to make sure that it's not tied together. Inami Moas, or to make sure that the hair is not moist, it's not filled with other dirt or dough or something like that. That would create a barrier between the water touching the hair. Mishum chatzitza, and that would suffice for the laws of chatzitza. But Ezra came along and Tigan Chafifa, he said that it's not just enough to look, but yeah, a woman must actually comb her hair before she goes to the mikvah. The peddlers are allowed to peddle their wares, their feminine products. Why? Because of the beauty products. So that women always have availability to be able to purchase beauty products. And the critical thing here is, the critical feature here is that no locale is permitted to ban these peddlers. He's effectively decreeing that they have a right to be there, and you can't stop them. Okay, v'tiken tefilo lebali kriyan. He created a ritual immersion for someone who's a balkari. A balkari is one who had a seminal emission. So the Gemara says, "Daraisu." This is biblical. The chsiv v'ish kisei simenu shichvat zera v'rochas b'sar b'mayim. A man who had a seminal emission, then he goes to the mikvah. So clearly, after a seminal emission, one is required to go to the mikvah. So the Gemara says, no. The Raisahu l'truma v'kachim. Biblically speaking, if you want to eat truma, or you want to consume kachim. In other words, if you want to have ritual purity, why would you want to have ritual purity? Because if you want to eat truma or you want to eat kachim, you must have ritual purity. So then you would have to go to the mikvah. But if you weren't caring for that, as it wasn't necessary to have ritual purity, so then you didn't have to go to the mikvah. Also, who tikkun afil divrei Torah. So Ezra came along, and Ezra said, no, it's not just the Gemara here brings that divrei Torah, but the Gemara in Brachos also says something else. It's tefillah for davening and for studying Torah. Obviously, one should go to the mikvah if he had a seminal emission. That is the reason why many people have a custom to go to the mikvah every single day. Some people only go when they have a seminal emission. And however, halachically speaking, one is not required to complete this tefillah. Most of the community could not fulfill this obligation, and therefore the rabbinical decree was not valid. That being said, it is the case that many do. Going to the mikvah on Erev Shabbos is also a partial fulfillment of this decree. Okay, and it's interesting in certain places it's actually pretty common to see people going for Tfilas Ezra. Asar dvarim nemru b'Yerushalayim. There are 10 things that are said about Jerusalem. Ein habayis cholot. Okay, so 10 decrees, 10 halachas. These are not really decrees. A lot of these are biblical. Let's go through that. The critical feature of Jerusalem is that all of Israel was divided up. Right. So far, we saw one exception, one partial exception, which was the Kinneret, the sea of, right. You're allowed to fish the Kinneret, even if you're not a member of the tribe of Naphtali. The key component here is that Jerusalem was not divided up amongst the tribes. Now, how was it divided up? That I'm not quite sure of either. I should borrow this for a second, see if they address it. Basically, Jerusalem was not divided up amongst the tribes. So at this point, I would have to guess that that there was an original cadre of, let's say, soldiers or families that were the first ones to settle Jerusalem when it was conquered in the times of Yeshua. Those families get basically permanent ownership over that land. We'll explain in a moment. Generally speaking, the rule is if you sell property, it goes back in Yomi, right? Jubilee comes. Now, how many Jubilees? We said there was only a handful of Yevils. Yovel was in effect for the earlier portion of the first Beis HaMikdash. As soon as there was a partial exile, Yovel ceased to happen. Maybe there were 4 or 5 or 6, maybe 7 Yevils. No more than 7. Okay, now there's one exception to that rule. What's the exception? A house in a walled city. We discussed this at the end of Saita. what's the law of the house in a walled city is that if you sell a house in a walled city, you have 2 years to redeem it. If you don't redeem it within 2 years, then the ownership is permanently transferred. And this is the logic behind this. It's sort of a security feature, right? Obviously, people living in if you live in a what do you call a gated community, right? There's restrictions on who could buy. You can't just buy into a gated community. Otherwise, there'd be no need for the gate. Anyone could just buy their way in. The whole purpose of the gated community is that there's a certain standard to be able to get in.
Amen.
So you think of a walled city, there's security features. There is a security guard. In England, the wall is the security. And therefore, we don't want to have constant rotation of people going in and out. So if you buy it, you have 2 years to redeem it. You don't redeem it in 2 years, it's permanently the other person's.
Here says 1 year, but maybe
I'm sorry, it's 1 year. It's 1 year. It's 1 year. That's correct. Okay. The exception to this is Jerusalem. Jerusalem, despite the fact that it's a walled city, is not in this category. Ein habayis, so that's the first one. Ein habayis cholot. After 50 years, the house goes back to the original owner. Now, who is the original owner? I'm not sure. Because remember, it wasn't divided up by tribes. If it was, I'd have a portion there. No, I mean, seriously. Yeah, so Jerusalem was Jerusalem was split between Binyamin and Yehudah. And as I may have mentioned this before, I do have a family tradition from my father's father, who heard from his father's 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 father, that we are from Shevet Binyamin. So I know I actually can claim which Shevet I'm part of. So I would have a spot in Jerusalem, but obviously now I don't. Yes, if it would be split between Binyamin and Yehudah. So Binyamin had the Mizbeach, and Yehudah had the other part of the Beis Mikdash. Okay, next one. The Egla Rufo. Egla Rufo is basically where a dead body is found at the edge of a city. You measure if the body is found precisely between 2 cities. You cut the head off of a lamb. Egla is a not a lamb, a calf. Egla is a calf. A Rufa means his head is, or if it's chopped off. Jerusalem does not bring an Egla Rufa. The Einanas Ir Nidachas. If most people in Jerusalem worship idols, the city is not destroyed. The Einimatam Benegam, houses in the city do not become Tameh if there was a nega in the house. Negam is this spiritual affliction of leprosy. It afflicts not only people but clothing and houses. And the status of a house in Jerusalem is that it does not become Tameh from a nega. All these, by the way, all have to do with one reason. The reason is because all of these are conditional on the property being inherited. Meaning the property was divided up to each tribe when they came into Israel. Because Jerusalem was not divided up, it has none of these rules. A couple practical ones. The might see by Zizin Vigzus Troyes. So you think of a log cabin, right? The edge of a log cabin, you have logs sticking out usually. And that's permitted in most locales. We can enact ordinances that sort of create a framework of rules that would allow that to be done. Not in Jerusalem. Jerusalem can't do that. No, nothing can be sticking out of your house. We'll explain why. We don't make garbage dumps. We don't make a kiln to fire clay vessels. Thank you. We do not make gardens or orchards. We'll explain why. Except for the rose garden. This is not the wool rose garden that's next to the Knesset today. It's not actually roses. The vrodin here that we're talking about is a special ingredient, also known as kipas hayarden. If anyone says keteris after davening, you'll probably be familiar with the word kipas hayarden. Kipas hayarden is a special plant that basically, if you put this plant in the keteris, the smoke of the keteris would rise straight up without spreading. And when they brought the keteris would go straight up, and then when it hit the ceiling, it would spread to the side. It spread across the ceiling and then fall down on the sides of the room. Very unique substance that was grown in this garden of roses. That existed from the time of the early prophets. The Ein Megaldim Batar Negalim. You do not raise chickens. Ve'enin belinin by SMS, and we do not allow a body to stay overnight. There's many communities in Jerusalem have the custom today that they still follow this rule. They do not allow a body to stay overnight. There have been exceptions that have been made, most notably Rabbi Yashu's body was left overnight when he died, and the reason for that was because he died late afternoon. By the time they would have made a funeral, it would have been late at night. And the rabbis at the time felt that he was going to have a massive funeral. He did have a massive funeral. And they were concerned that having a funeral late at night with such an enormous amount of people would result in very dangerous circumstances. So they delayed the funeral and they had the funeral in the morning.
So
But it's very rare to have that.
So you're saying that these groups, if someone dies early enough in the day, they try to bury them before sundown?
Correct.
Wow.
If one dies by daytime, he's buried that day or that evening as soon as they can get the body to be buried.
Also, if he dies after the sun goes down, it's officially the next day. And so
Yeah, I think they have some
not
more. I think they
overnight.
have some more time. Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's how it works. Okay. Where are we? We are now on Pebez Amud Beis 82b, and now we're going through each one in specific. Each one of these 10 things in specific. Okay. About halfway down the page. First one line is habayas. Okay, ein habayas cholot. The house is not cholot. The house does not get permanently transferred, unlike a typical walled city, where after 1 year the house is permanently transferred. Houses in Jerusalem are not permanently transferred. Why is this? The verse states, "V'kom habayas asher lo ychaimo l'tzmisas." L'koina oisel l'deroisav. The house that the house that has a wall, it means the koinais of the Roisav to the one who acquires it forever. This presumes that the walled city was otherwise belonging to a specific tribe, but Jerusalem was not given over to the tribes, meaning it was not a divided city. The city was not included in the division of the cities of Jerusalem, the cities of Israel. And therefore, it's not included in this rule of the house getting permanently sold. Similarly, you do not bring an egla rufa. The verse states, the land that God gave you as an inheritance. But Jerusalem is not an inheritance. Because Jerusalem was not divided. It does not become an iranidachas, a city of idol worship that's destroyed. Arecha, your cities. Jerusalem is not your city, because Jerusalem was never divided. How are the original owners of Jerusalem? How did they get their portion? I'm not sure about that. It's an interesting, because the people who got it first basically get it forever, because every 50 years it goes back to them. Interesting. Okay. It does not have tumah of nigam. If the houses have this spiritual affliction that we call leprosy, they do not become tamei. Achuza is your inheritance, and again, Jerusalem was not divided to the tribes. We said you can't, when you build a house, there's nothing sticking out of the walls. That's the local ordinance. So Gemara explains, because of, if there's tumah, we don't want the tumah to spread into the house, or to spread needlessly. Because Jerusalem would sometimes be quite full, we don't want people to be damaged, to get hurt by pieces of wood sticking out of nowhere. You do not make garbage piles, landfills, mishum shkotzim, because they bring with them a lot of bugs, and those bugs bring tumah. Right? We said there are 8 types of bugs that bring tumah, and you don't want a garbage pile that will invite that type of company. We do not allow a kiln to be made in Jerusalem, mishum kutra, because of the smoke. It's Jerusalem is the holy city, and we want it to be neat and appropriate and honorable. We do not allow them to make gardens or orchards. What's the reason for that? Mishum sircha, because of the smell. There's a few explanations of this. One is because it's fertilized, and fertilizer is cow dung. And it was before the days they sold deodorized in Home Depot. So, cow manure was necessarily odorized and didn't come with a pleasant smell.
Didn't have enough perfume.
Yeah. And the other possibility that's brought down also is that Rashi suggests is that there's the compass pile, which apparently smells. So all the trimmings that come off, they let them rot, and that smells. So they would not allow that. The in Megalvin Botarnigolim, we do not allow them to raise chickens. Mishum Kochim. Remember, chickens peck in the garbage and they spread the tumah everywhere. So obviously Jerusalem's a city that requires a high level of kedusha, of sanctity, so that people can consume kachim that are required to be eaten, sacrifices that are required to be eaten with sanctity. So we don't want chickens running around, doing their thing. And we do not allow a dead body to remain overnight. Gemara says, that is an accepted tradition. The Gemara does not provide a reason for that. Okay, a little bit more of easy Gemara today until we get to tomorrow, and then things get back to normal. It's nice to have a little bit of relief after a very difficult part. Okay, one is not allowed to raise pigs. Yeah, it's interesting. I should mention this as a side. There is a custom, and I've seen a few people have this custom that they will not say the word pig. You'll hear them say a davar acher. Davar acher literally means something else. And I don't know. A few of my Rebbeim had the custom. Nobody ever told me to do it, or so that's why I don't do it. But it's interesting. Okay. When the people of the Chashmonaim amongst their descendants were two brothers who got into a massive fight. Zelza, they were fighting with each other. There was Horkenes bin Bifnim v'Aristobulus bin Bechutz. Now it's interesting. The Gemara points. One second.
These guys are a big deal. They get mentioned even in the non-Jewish historical records.
No. I just got confused. No, it's not. You're talking about Herods.
Well,
that would be Hordes.
I mean, in terms of Gentile histories and chronicles of the era, these guys' names come up.
It could be. I don't know. But Horkenes was. I presume Horkenes was a bona fide. So what happened was, the entire Chashmonai family was destroyed. Right. If you remember, we saw the Gemara at the end of Kedushin. It was about 3 months ago. We had a Gemara with a whole story with it was Rav Nachman and Rav Yehudah. Right. Rav Yehudah called somebody a slave, and Rav Nachman summoned him to the entire. The guy went to Rav Nachman to complain. Rav Yehudah can't call him a slave. And the end of the result of the conversation, there's a whole story. He was very upset with Rav Nachman. He teased Rav Nachman like 8 times. That was 8. It was like 5. And Rav Nachman's wife he teased, and then eventually Rav Nachman was like, "So what do you want? Like, what are you here for?" So he said, "You called me to an Torah." So he said, "What's the problem?" Anyway, so he said that you called the guy a slave. So the guy said, and the guy was there. So the guy says, "How can you call me a slave? I'm a Chashmonai. I'm a descendant from the Chashmonai family. They were Kahanim, and they were the conquerors. They were the liberators of Jerusalem at the time that Jerusalem was besieged by the Assyrian Greeks." So the Gemara says Rabbi Yehudah told him back that that anyone who says Kol Omer Mibeis Chashmonai, who he's an Eved, he must be a slave, because Loinishtayer by who Rivan, she jumped off the roof. This was in the time of Herod. Herod wiped out all the Chashmonaim. Now that was Herod. This appears to be Horkenes. Horkenes is probably a bona fide Chashmonai who was actually worthy of dignity. So Horkenes was on the inside, and Aristobulus was on the outside. And they were fighting with each other. Every day they dropped down some coins and they'd purchase a lamb for the sacrifice. There was an older man that he knew Chachmas Yavanis. What is Chachmas Yavanis? We'll explain here. We'll get to the Gemara. Will explain it later, but I'll jump the gun a little bit here. Chachmas Yavanis is not Greek philosophy, nor is it a Greek language. It's a sort of a mannerism of nobility, and this mannerism can be used as a method of communication. It's not a specific language. It's a certain way of behaving. It's like a code that the nobility used to use. So this guy knew the code. So he coded to them that they should stop sending in the sacrifices. As long as they're bringing sacrifices, you'll never be able to conquer the city. So sure enough, the next day, they dropped down a basket of coins. Instead of putting in a lamb, they put a pig inside. Once the pig got to half the height of the wall, the pig sort of anchored its legs or its hands, feet into the wall. The land of Israel shook from the sort of the tumah that this animal is bringing into the holy city. In that time they decreed, I said, cursed is the one who lives in Israel and raises pigs. I'm sorry, it's not just in Israel, it's anywhere. Cursed is the man who raises pigs. And curses the man who teaches his son this coded mannerism with the nobility. Well, at that point we learned, okay, so basically there was a siege in the city. So as part of a siege, and in the ancient doctrine, you would raise any produce, any edible stuff from the entire surrounding area as far as you can. Because at nighttime there was no lamps, there was no way to ensure that nobody's going to climb over the wall and grab some produce and come back in. So therefore, it was the imperative of the siege was basically to destroy any growable, any produce in the area or grain. So that it was specifically that year. So when it came time to get the Omer or the Shtei Alechem, they could not find any local grain. Typically, they would cut grain from the fields that were closest to Jerusalem. But that year, there were no fields closest to Jerusalem. They had to travel quite a distance to be able to find grain for these two sacrifices, for the sacrifice of the Omer and the Shtei Alechem, which is barley. Okay, is it prohibited? So they said it's cursed is the one who teaches their kids chachmas yavanas, the mannerisms of the nobility. Yomar says, is that the case? Miasira. Hatanya, we learned in the Brayso. Rabbi said, the Eretz Yisrael loshen sursi lama. Borrow the volume for a second here. Let me translate this word. Okay, it says why the Syriac language? Oylosh and Kodesh, Oylosh and Yavanis, either talk in Hebrew or talk in Greek, talk in either language. Clearly, then, if one is allowed to speak in Greek, top of the page. If one is allowed to speak in Greek, we're on top now of 83a, Pegel Moment Aleph, second line. Oylosh and Hektish, Oylosh and Yavanis, either speak in Hebrew or speak in the language in the Greek language. The Amar of Yosi, next page. Right there. The Amar of Yosi explains, Bavel and Bavel, Loshen Arami Lama. Why speaking in Aramaic, I Loshen Hektish, or talking Loshen Kodesh, I Loshen Parsi, or talking in the Persian language. So anyway, clearly here, one is allowed to talk Greek. So Amar, the Gemara says, well, no, there's a difference. Loshen Yavani, the language of Greek, that's permitted, Lechud, that's its own category. However, Chachmas Yavanas, the wisdom of Greek, Lechud, that's its own category. Okay. So the Gemara says, "V'chachmas yavanis mi'asira" is knowing this set of knowledge. Now, clearly, this is a knowledge that's communicated, right? Because this zaken echad, this elderly man, was communicating using this mannerism. So the Gemara says, "Is it prohibited?" V'amar of Yehudah, Amar Shmuel. Yehudah says the name of Shmuel. V'shomim Shimon Gamliel, the name of Shimon ben Gamliel. Eini oilol l'nafshi. My eyes cry for myself. Mikol b'nais iri, from all the daughters of my city. Okay, what happened? Elef Yilodim Hayu Beis Abba. There were 1,000 children that my father ran a school for. Chamesh Me'as, 500 of them lamdu Torah. They learned Torah. Chamesh Me'as lamdu Chachmas Yivanis. Another 500 of them learned this mannerism, the mannerism of the nobility. Elani, and I was the only one who survived. Elani kan me here uben achi Abba ba'asya, and my uncle. The son of, my cousin in the town of Asya. Regardless, clearly, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is the son of Gamliel, right? Rabbi Gamliel. And Rabbi Gamliel, his father, who was a great scholar, is clearly teaching the wisdom of the Greeks, meaning this mannerisms, these mannerisms. So obviously it's permitted. What's going on? So the Gemara says, Shani Beis Rabbi Gamliel shei krev on the Malchus. The people of the house of Rabbi Gamliel, they were close to the king. and because, in other words, because they had to participate in the nobility, so they had to learn the mannerisms of the nobility. Tanya, like we learned, Hamasaper Kumi, somebody who gets a Kumi haircut. A Kumi haircut is basically where you cut off the top of the head, but you leave it in the back. You keep the hair in the back to grow long. This is the pathway of the Emori. It's the pathway of idol worship. However, there was a man whose name was Avtulmus ben Ruven. They allowed him to get the Kumi haircut. Why? Because he had to participate in the nobility and he had to look the part of the nobility. They allowed the house of Gamliel to speak in the language of, in these mannerisms of the Greeks, because they participated in the nobility. So they had to know the language of the nobility. Okay, person should not raise a dog unless it's tied with chains. The rabbis taught, person should not be raising dogs unless it's tied with chains. However, if you live in a border town, then you're allowed to have a dog. What does that mean? Presumably, it's a type of watch. It's like a security feature, right? Before the alarms, they had dogs. When dogs would see an uninvited guest, they would raise a ruckus. So if you live next to the border, you're permitted to have a dog. You have to keep it tied by day, right? Remember, we don't want to have anyone miscarrying, any woman miscarrying. We'll soon see the story of a woman who miscarried. But at nighttime, you allow them to roam the border, and if they see any trespassers, they'll let us know. Rabbi Yehudah said, somebody who raises dogs, it's like he raises pigs. In other words, they're both prohibited. Gemara says, well, quite so. The Mishnah says they're both prohibited. What exactly is Rabbi Elazar teaching us by telling us they're both prohibited? They're equal. We know they're both prohibited. Gemara says, in other words, previously we saw the Gemara. Gemara says not only is it prohibited to raise pigs, but one who raises pigs is cursed. So too, one who raises dogs is also cursed. Amr Rav Yosef Bar Yomi, Amr of Nachman. Rav Yosef Bar Yomi says the name of Nachman. Bavel K'ir Hasmuch L'Sfardami. Tirgum, 1 second. Rav Nachman says that certain areas in Bavel are like areas that are next to the border, and Tirgum Nahardoi, and they explain this refers to Nahardoi. Nahardoi was considered a border town of Bavel, and therefore Nahardoi, they were also permitted to raise dogs. Again, you tie it by day, but at night, these are watchdogs. Okay. Dorish Rav Destoi de Min Biri. Rav Destoi from the town of Biri taught. Uvenucha, when the ark came to rest, Yomer, we said, Shuv Hashem Rivves Alpha Yisrael. This is a very interesting argument. I cannot make heads or tails. The arts probably will have to explain it. He's trying to argue that you shouldn't have a dog. And listen to the argument. Very, very interesting argument. Yeah, so the verse states, Shuv Hashem Rivavais Alpha Yisrael. Rivavais is 10,000, Alpha is thousands. So Rivavais is 2 10,000s. How much is that? 20,000. Alpha is 2,000s, 22,000. Okay. To teach you, the Shechina rests in a much greater way when there's 22,000 Jews present. Okay. 1 second.
Perfect.
Now imagine this. I'm reading from the back end because a few lines are missing here. Imagine there was a congregation of 21,999 Jews, and amongst them, there was a pregnant woman, Binam, and they would have completed a unit of 22,000 Jews, and they would have had the Shekhinah come down. And what happened? A Kelev barked at her, and she miscarried her child, and now the Shekhinah is not going to be present. Okay, that's how bad it is to grow a dog. It's a very, here's to see if the article explains this argument. I cannot make heads or tails out of it.
Pugs get a special exemption.
Dogs aren't dogs.
I'm afraid not.
They're also allowed to patrol the border towns without a leash. They don't have to be chained up during the day either. So
So it's if a dog barks at a pregnant woman?
We'll explain in a moment.
I guess it's.
They don't really
it's
explain
this
it.
fucking
I,
dog.
I, I can't, I'm not sure, like, there are many other ways you can bring an argument about why you shouldn't have a dog. This is a very unique way of bringing an argument.
People use the barking dog as a deterrent to burglars. They have recordings set up and if somebody's knocking on the door, moves, the dog starts barking, the recording starts barking. So they're still using that philosophy.
Interesting. See, here we go. Talk about that story. I'll give you another story. And this will explain to you about the thing with the dogs causing women to miscarry. It's the Ola Meifam Bahu Besa. There was a woman who went to bake in a certain house, and sure enough, there was a dog, Navach Bakalba. The dog barked at her. So Amal Murray, the owner of the house, said to her, don't be concerned about the dog. Shakal Nivi, Shkula Nivi. I have already removed the teeth that he uses to bite. So if I remember, a dog has canine teeth.
He
It's
has
four
long teeth that the dog bites. Yeah.
Is that right? A dog has four
Yeah.
canine teeth.
Yeah.
So
It'll gum you to death.
So he removed these four teeth. So basically, in English, they say he defanged the dog. So Amrlay, so she says to him, Shkilu tivusach, take your good favor, v'shadya chizri, and go throw it on the coals. Chizri is literally the thorns. Kvar nod vlad, I've already lost the child.
Oh.
Ein person nishvin liyonim. We do not spread. It's 55. Okay, we'll stop here. Tomorrow I have an early morning. I will not be able to teach. I don't think at least I'll be able to teach. Somebody else will probably come in. We're sculling
You
for
haven't
somebody
got a
else.
draft tea yet?
No, I don't. I wasn't sure what I was gonna get up to.
We're almost done.
Yeah, it's in the parish.
Bob.
So we'll see. I'll try to arrange that I can at least teach. Maybe I'll dive in later. See what happens. But it is possible somebody else will be here tomorrow. Okay, have a great day.